when I was on my dating journey before I met my now husband, I remember going on so many dates. I think I went on like 300 dates in like a 2-year period.
What?
I was on a mission to find my person.
That's a lot of wardrobe.
It was a lot of wardrobe. It was a lot of effort. But, as much as on the surface I was ready, quote unquote, I was so terrified underneath, and I would rarely ever get beyond that first date because I was always looking for that red flag. I was looking for it. I was scanning for it. I would even ask questions that would only bring out the red flag, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I really got in touch with the fact that I was doing that I could actually be more vulnerable and look for the connection points that enabled me to take a little bit more responsibility for how I was showing up to create that dynamic. Mm-hmm. So even red flags can become yellow flags, green flags. If we work on creating agreements to prioritize the safe relationship, right? So somebody that may be struggling with drinking, but is willing to now take accountability for it and do the work to heal that part of themselves so they can relate in healthier ways in the relationship. Somebody that might be really critical and avoids vulnerability. That was me for a lot of my life. If they're willing to take responsibility for those things and start to relate in new ways, they can create a healthier relational dynamic. So we all have red flags inside of us. We all have them inside of us. And I think when we do that work of really exploring and excavating what those are in ourselves, we just approach relationship in a more humble way. And I think that external focus, it's a tricky thing because I think the boundaries have to be there, but it has to be paired with that self-awareness journey. You know what I mean?
Sure. The boundaries it's funny, even before we started recording, we were already talking about boundaries. Boundaries can either be something that heals us and keeps us safe and strong and resilient, but if they're porous through learned behavior or trauma, capital T, lowercase t, yes, they can actually be really harmful. And that can be a red flag that we unconsciously seek out in others. Did you find in your journey that you had strong boundaries when you were dating the 300 dates? Mm-hmm. Or were your boundaries a work in progress at that point?
I think I had really rigid boundaries.
Rigid boundaries. What's the difference between rigid and strong?
Yeah. So healthy boundaries is when we can look at the person before us and really have this beautiful, adaptable way. We decide whether a boundary is even needed at all. When we have really strong internal boundaries, sometimes we don't even need external boundaries as much. For those of us that have had, childhood trauma or difficult, chaotic experiences, we might need to step into a phase where we need to actually communicate and have those external boundaries. But sometimes those boundaries can also be a trap, right? They can actually prevent us from, my dating experiences, from connection, from creating intimacy, and really just my autopilot was no. Self-protection. No, this is going to be safe. This isn't going to be safe. I'm going to be hurt. And on the flip side of that is maybe somebody that grew up in an experience of neglect in their family system. So they long to be seen. They long for connection so deeply that they will take whatever is available and not really do it in a way that has those healthy standards, which is the boundaries. Mm-hmm. So they're on either extreme. It can hurt us. One of them hurts us from having connection. The other one hurts us from only having connections with potential people that do end up hurting us and taking advantage of us. So kind of exploring where we fit in that spectrum so that we can be really fluid with that. And it's, again, knowing your brain, right? What's your autopilot? Are you going from that self-protection and really teasing that apart a little bit?
I loved how you said knowing your brain, which is maybe a bit counterintuitive at first audible. To know your brain, you actually have to, in my opinion, I'm curious how you feel, learn by the results that your brain creates. So in other words, if your brain is running on autopilot and there's a default mode network that's just searching for threat, yes, you're eventually going to find it everywhere. And then potentially you could block yourself from somebody that is just doing their inner work on their journey, and they give a little tiny hint of a hard no for you or a red flag for you. And you could potentially lose somebody that may have been incredibly amazing and loving for you. I remember in one of your interviews, you were talking about that you would get close and then you would feel like, don't hurt me, and you'd pull back. Yes. That style, we're going to go into all of them because I know this is like really one of the things that you're super skilled at is attachment, which, gosh, how many podcasts have we done on attachment? Probably 10 or 15. Wow. My favorite one was with Mark and Dr. Stan Tatkin. But I really am loving what I'm seeing on your website and in your work. There's really 4. Out of those 4, and we'll go into the other 3, Which one did you see in a previous version of Sylvie really playing out? And how did that play out for you?
Great question. Yeah. So, can I share a little bit about
Please
the attachment?
share whatever.
Yeah. So, a little backstory about how the attachment styles work, and then I'll share about how I experienced my own attachment. So, attachment is really that that relationship with that primary caregiver, whoever was that core person that was responsible for attuning to us, helping us to regulate, making repairs quickly so that we did experience that regulation and safety as a child. And when we had a parent that was really consistent with that enough times, and research shows that it's only about 30% that's required, which is kind of monumental. Not that the 70% of the time for them to be abusive, but 30% of really attuned attunement, and then the rest of the time the repairs happen quickly. So they get it wrong, they repair quickly.
Wow, that takes off a lot of pressure.
Right?
We don't have to be perfect,
No,
y'all.
we don't have to be perfect. There's a lot of resilience
this.
designed in nature. But where it starts to create more anxious attachment is when that caregiver is really attuned sometimes, but really offline a lot of other times, whether that's mental health related or they're just busy working a lot. And so there's that there isn't a predictability and reliability for that child, so they can experience anxiety as an adult, abandonment, fear of like, oh my gosh, is this person going to be there? I'm afraid they're going to leave me physically, emotionally, one of those. And then for more of the dismissive avoidant, there's a lot of that emotional neglect where they don't experience much at all attunement. So they are much more self-reliant as adults. They're like their mini CEOs, I like to call them, that really don't see the value of relationships, even though deep down inside, of course, everybody longs to be in relationship with people. That's very human.
Yeah.
And then the disorganized, fearful avoidant is one that came out more recently, which is that chaotic household upbringing experience. And that's where you have a lot of that flip-flop, which is what I think I related to a lot. On one side, I really longed for a relationship, but I was terrified. So I would get in and I would opt out. So even in the beginning of my relationship with my husband, and this is always embarrassing to share, mortifying, but it's important to be honest because I think this is how we all realize that we are growing. I would threaten to leave the relationship all the time whenever I would feel scared.
You pack a suitcase?
Oh yeah, I always have my metaphorical suitcase ready to go.
Did you actually have a suitcase
No.
packed in the closet?
But it was in my mind. The suitcase was
Okay.
being packed in my mind all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, that was very destabilizing for my husband. That did not feel good for him and to feel safe at all. And I had my first therapy session with Dr. Stan Tekin. We had a couples therapy session with him. That was the first thing he called me out on. You cannot do that, Sylvie. I was like, ugh. I just remember that feeling gulp of like, oh, ugh. Of course, I know that intellectually, but
Sure.
when I would be under threat, I grew up in a household of violence as a child. So I was terrified that something really bad was going to happen, even though I had such a safe partner. Brian couldn't be more of a gentle, kind, loving man, but it's still a man and I still get really scared. And so I had to really work with my own nervous system around my own fearful avoidant tendencies so that I could, what do I need from him in order to stay? Even if that means just go to the next room. How can I communicate my fears? And, a lot of times when we would be in conflict, Brian would come to me, would lower his body on the, lower than me to show he's signaling that he's not a threat. And he would just say, I'm not going to hit you. I'm not going to hit you right now, Sylvia. I would never do that. And just like that constant messaging over and over landed more and more deeply in my nervous system, but it took time,
How long did it take? Do you mind me asking? If you look back.
There's still moments where I have my metaphorical suitcase packed, but I know what it is. I know that it exists inside of me. That I think people think that, this healing journey, there's going to get to a point where we're perfectly healed and we're this perfectly conscious person. It's impossible. I think that we all carry 2 to 3 at least core vulnerabilities with us throughout our lifetime. I think we can absolutely do work to soften the charge. And I think we can create agreements with ourselves, internal boundaries with ourselves and with those we're in relationship with to create a secure functioning relationship. Like I still have that dialogue, but I don't communicate it in that way. I'll say, you know what, I need to take a break. I'm going to go in another room and I'll calm myself down. And that's an agreement I have with myself and that we've created in our relationship. Because that also triggers his abandonment wounds, which is part of what he struggles with, right? I like to say that to people because I can't tell you, Josh, how many people I've worked with that as soon as I say that, like you're allowed to have vulnerabilities in your relationship. You don't need to show up perfectly healed. They're like, what do you mean? I don't have to heal X, Y, and Z perfectly. I was like, no. Do you know anybody that is that? I'd like to meet that person.
I don't know anyone like that,
Yeah.
even when they have 12 million followers.
Exactly.
Like, it just doesn't exist. Whoa. So you love that episode? You'll love the one on the screen. Click it and enjoy.